On this episode of Andy's Autosport TV, we're going to install our GlowShift gauges on our diesel F250. Now, our Project F250 has a 7.3 liter diesel in it. It's also been upfitted with a Gibson exhaust and a Diablo Sport in-tune programmer. Now, today we're going to install our GlowShift gauges to monitor the critical engine and transmission functions to keep them from being catastrophic failure. Now, we've chosen exhaust gas temperature, boost, and transmission temperature. Now, the reason we've chosen the temperature gauges for our Project F250 is this truck, the majority of the time, is towing something. We have a race car that we take to the track or our equipment when we go to various events and shows. Now, the exhaust gas temperature is critical when you're going up those hills. We have a long hill and we're towing the race car. That EGT can climb really rapidly. When it does, that can cause head gasket failure or turbo failure. You want to make sure you monitor the exhaust gas temperature to keep that from happening. Transmission temperature, kind of the same thing. You're making one of those long pulls with a heavy trailer on the back. You want to monitor that transmission temperature so the transmission temperature fluid doesn't go upside down and lose its lubricity and cost you a transmission. Now, the reason we've chosen a boost gauge is our Project F250 has the in-tune i1000 from Diablo Sport installed. It has 3 different tunes in it. Now, depending on the other peripherals in your vehicle, like our Gibson exhaust or any other modifications you make, this can affect what happens to the turbo during boost. You can get boost creep and other phenomena that happen if you don't have things upgraded correctly. A boost gauge is critical to monitor these functions. Now, our exhaust gas temperature gauge is mechanical, and our boost and transmission temperature gauge are both electrical. The double vision gauges from GlowShift actually have an analog and a digital readout. GlowShift also makes a wide variety of gauge pods. Now, the gauge pod that we chose is a 3-gauge pillar pod. Now, this allows the gauges to be where they need to be so you don't have to take your eyes off the road to have a quick glance at what's going on. Now, GlowShift also makes these in a variety of colors to match your factory interior. Check out the link right here to view the gauges overview video that we've made about the different types of gauges and where you might need them for your vehicle. Now let's get started with our install. All right, now the first thing we're going to do is we're going to put in our EGT Probe. Now, what that involves on this is, on our F250, we're actually going to drill a hole in the exhaust manifold. Now, you can do it in the downpipe. The problem is sometimes you can get fluctuations on temperature 200 or 300 degrees off. So you want to get it before the up pipe, usually in one of the exhaust manifolds. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to use a drill bit and we're going to drill into the manifold. Now, we're going to use a 21/64 drill bit because we're going to have to tap it to an 1/8" pipe thread. And this is equivalent to a Q bit, or pretty close to a Q bit, which is what you need to do for 1/8" pipe. So there are some differing opinions on what you should do. Now, some people say put grease on the drill bit. Other people say use small holes first and go to bigger holes. I don't like to do any of those. I like to drill directly to the right size when I'm going into the exhaust side. The reason is most of those bits, most of those shavings are going to come down in your face, or they're going to come down on the ground rather than stay in the exhaust manifold. So when those shavings come down there, you don't have a problem with those going into the exhaust wheel and kind of messing up the seals. After we've tapped our manifold, you can thread in the fitting for the EGT probe. Now you can install the probe into the fitting and tighten it down. All right, now we're going to go ahead and install our tranny temperature gauge. Now, on our Project F250, we're very fortunate. We have a test port that's right here, and we're actually going to be able to pull a sending unit, or put our temperature sending unit in there. Now, if you have a different type of vehicle that doesn't have a test port like this, there are other options to do this. You can actually get a brass T, and this fitting will go in the top of the brass T, and you just tee it right into one of the tranny lines that comes out of the transmission. All right, now here's a little nugget for you. Whenever you're putting any type of sending unit in, you want to make sure you use some Teflon tape on the threads. This will make it have a good seal. Okay, lastly, we're going to go ahead and install our boost gauge. Now, there are a couple different places you can install the boost gauge. One is right in the top of the intake manifold. You have to drill and tap this. Now, the problem that I have with this is when you drill and tap that, metal shavings have the opportunity to get into the engine. Now, there are ways you can minimize that effect by stuffing a rag down inside the intake manifold and then sucking everything out with a shop vac before you do your finished installation. I still don't like that. The reason I don't is it's hard that those metal shavings, if they go down inside the engine, they go by the piston rings, in the combustion chambers, and into the cylinders. Not a good thing to do. Now, I know that sounds kind of contradictory to the exhaust. It's a little different. On the exhaust side, it's after the pistons, after everything, and it's just going to basically blow it through the turbo, which has a lot looser clearances, so there won't be a problem. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and tap into the MAP sensor line. Now, the MAP sensor stands for Manifold Absolute Pressure. Now, what this is it's what tells the computer how much boost you're putting out, which is exactly what we want to monitor anyway. So basically, we're just going to cut this line, and we're going to tee in this with this little brass fitting that we went and bought at the hardware store with 2 barbs, and then we're going to put our pressure sensor right on the top like this. Now, before we do this, we're going to go ahead and put Teflon tape on this to make sure we get a good seal. Now, a barb fitting will generally hold quite a bit of boost without coming off, but it's always best to put a clamp on there so you don't blow that off under high boost conditions. Now we're going to send our sensor wires through an existing hole on the firewall of our Project F250. Now, if you don't have an existing hole, you can drill one, but make sure you're not drilling into anything critical on the other side. To make pulling the wires up easier, you can run a wire or a coat hanger down through the top of the dash, attach your power wires to that, and then pull them back through. Repeat the same step for the signal wires. You may need to do these one at a time depending on the connections. Make sure you don't pull them to pull the connectors off the end of the wire. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and tie in the power circuit or the main harness for our gauges. Now, this doesn't have any of the signal wires going to it. This is just strictly to power the gauges themselves. Now, there are 4 wires, and we're going to basically tie them all together. We're going to tie all the blacks together to make a common ground. We're going to tie all the whites together to have a common switched wire. We're going to have the reds for a common constant hot, and then the oranges are all going to go to the headlight switch so that when we turn on our headlights, it's going to dim the lights 30%. Now, how we're going to hook all this up is we're actually going to use an add-a-circuit fuse link. Now, these are really cool. What you do basically is you find your circuits in your fuse box that you want to use. Now, in our case, we need a constant hot and a switched hot so that the wire is only hot when the key is in the on position. What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and find those in our fuse box, and then we're going to add a 10 amp fuse for our second circuit in each one of these ADA circuits. Okay, so then how we're going to do this is we're going to find our circuits that we're going to hook up, and we're going to do that with a test light or with a multimeter. Now, we're going to use a multimeter. So we're going to go ahead and ground, and we're going to try to find a constant hot right now. Okay, there's one. There's one. There's one. Okay, now I found a 10 amp circuit. Now, you have to remember, on a fuse box, now each individual fuse in the fuse block can only handle so much current. So you want to find a fuse that's relatively small. For example, I found a 10 amp fuse that is constant hot. Now, that's where I'm going to add my extra circuit to. If you add it to let's say, for example, I have this 30 amp circuit down here. If I add another 10 amps to that, it possibly could melt the wires. They're not designed to carry that much current. So we're going to find the lowest circuit that we possibly can find, and we're going to add a link to that. That way we don't overload the wiring that's behind it. Okay, now that we have our constant hot, we're going to look for a switched hot. So what we're going to do is we're going to find out which one of these wires is not hot right now. Then we're going to turn the key to the on position and make sure it has power once it's on. Now we're going to verify that it's not hot. Okay, now we found our switch circuit, so we're going to go ahead and add our extra circuit to that one. Another 10 amp circuit too, by the way, so we don't overload the wiring on the back. Pop that in there. Okay, and now we can wire our gauges to our two circuits. Okay, now what I've done is I've actually gone through and wired all three of those together like I talked about a minute ago and put them all together so all the wires just come off with one single wire. Now I've left these a little bit long and it's kind of exaggerated and definitely doesn't need to be this long. You should trim these and make them the right size. What I'm going to do is just coil them up and put them underneath and have them zip tied so they're nice and tidy. But now I can connect my red constant hot wire to my constant hot fuse panel right here. So we're going to do that. We're going to crimp that. This is with our ATA circuit. And then we have our white wire, which goes to a switched hot. And we know that that one is this one right here, so we're going to tie that in. Okay, now we're going to find a good solid ground. And I've put my NSPA eyelet connector on the end of that, so we'll find a good solid ground and tie that in. Okay, and then we're going to take our green wire. Now our green wire is actually in here is orange. I didn't have orange wire, so I just used green as a different color. And we're going to connect that to the headlight switch. Now this is going to dim our gauges 30% as soon as you turn the headlights on so they won't be overbearing at night. So now we're going to hook up our orange wire from our gauges to our headlight switch so that when we turn our lights on, once again, the gauges will dim 30%. Now, if you have a wiring diagram, this is very easy. You can just pick out which wire you need to connect it to and connect to that wire. If you don't, you get a test light, and you're going to ground your test light, or a multimeter in our case, and you're going to turn the lights to the park position, and then you're going to probe each one of these wires until you find the one that's hot. Once you find one that's hot, you're going to turn the light off, and if that wire goes dead, then you know you've got the right wire, and that's what you're going to tie into. Okay, now we're getting ready to install our actual gauge pod on our A-pillar. Now what we're going to do is there are several different options. You can actually use screws, you can use glue, or double stick tape. Now we've test fitted our gauge pod and it actually fits very, very well. So we're just going to use double stick tape, which is plenty strong. A lot of body kits use double stick tape, so it's not going to have any problem holding on our A-pillar gauge pod. Now we're going to pull our trim loose because our trim actually holds part of our A-pillar in, or our pillar pod in. So we're going to pull this out of the way. Now we're going to run our wires through the appropriate spot. Now just pick where you want to put your gauges. If you want your boost gauge up high or your EGT or your trans temperature, just make sure you put those in the proper position where you want them. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and hook up our gauges. Now we've got all of our wires pulled through. We're going to hook up our trans temp gauge first. And then we have, this is our boost gauge. And then last but not least, we're going to do our EGT. Now I'm going to put that one on top. Now the reason I'm putting EGT on top is because we tow with this a lot, and that's the most important thing to me is the EGT and trans temp. So those will be on the top, and the bottom will have the boost separated in the middle. All right, our exhaust temperature is already coming up right away. See? When we turn on our headlights, you can see that the lights dim, exactly the function it's supposed to have, so it doesn't blow you out at night. All right, now that we've got our gauges installed to monitor critical functions and temperatures, we're ready to go tow our race car or do some serious off-roading. Popular brands we carry are Intellitronics, Autometer, and of course what we chose for our Project F250, GlowShift. If you have any questions, feel free to call one of our knowledgeable sales staff at 1-800-419-1152 or email us at info@andysautosport.com. And once you get your vehicle modified, make sure you send us pictures to customer.rides@andysautosport.com. We may feature your vehicle on our webpage. We hope you've learned something today, and we'll see you on another episode of Andy's Autosport TV.